Hey, brothers and sisters, just bringing part two of the Nephilim series. We're going to start in Matthew 24:37. It says, "But as it was in the days of Noah, so also shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark." Now, even when I was studying the rapture, I read over that. I didn't think twice about it. It just, to me, appeared to be like he was saying that it was life as usual. People were just in the world doing their worldly thing. But then I saw, I told you about that guy, Stephen Ben-Nun from Israeli News Live, and he does the Ben-Nun Institute for Biblical Studies, and he broke down the Hebrew in that, and it was quite interesting. And in his study, he said that the text was alluding that the fallen angels were eating humans, drinking their blood, and taking the daughters of Adam as wives to make offspring, with the intention of corrupting the human DNA. With the DNA of the fallen angels, and this is described in detail in the book of Enoch. And I read the book of Enoch and the book of Joshua and the book of Jubilees. And when he said it, when I heard him say it, I couldn't believe that I missed it when I read it, because I remembered those books. I remember reading those books. It referred to them, those books refer to the fallen angels as runaways. The angels themselves were sent down here to keep an eye on man. They were called the Watchers. Their job was to watch after man. The ones that fell were called the runaways. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the what they're called. Now, the fallen angels are referred to in the Bible as the sons of God in Genesis. And that's Bene Ha-Elohim is the Hebrew for that. So when you see Bene Ha-Elohim, it's referring to the sons of God, or the fallen angels, or the runaways, they're also called. In Genesis 6:1-4, it says, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim, the giants, were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown." Genesis 6:1-4. Now, the book of Enoch elaborates in great deal about how the fallen ones had set out to corrupt the DNA bloodline. That was their goal. The humans have a double helix DNA, and the fallen angels have a triple-stranded helix DNA. And it was designed to corrupt the bloodline to Jesus. In essence, almost like the principle of the Terminator, when he was sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor before she could have John Connor. It's like the same exact thing. God prophesies that the seed would crush Satan's head, although Satan would bruise his heel. So Satan knows there's a seed coming. So he figures, if I can corrupt the bloodline, which is the seed, then I eliminate that which is sent here to destroy me. So it was a brilliant plan, you have to admit. I mean, not to give him too much credit or anything. It was a good plan, but it didn't work. Now, it's not possible that God is saying that Noah isn't sinless, because the Bible tells us in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. In Genesis 6:9, it says Job was a just man and perfect in his generation. Now, in his generation, that comes from a Hebrew word which is temen, and it means genetically perfect. It's the same word used to describe a genetically perfect a heifer that they would have to sacrifice. It's the genetics. So it's talking about Noah's genetics. His bloodline had not been corrupted, and incidentally, he was the only one. It was the last. He was the last one on earth. He was the last pure human. Him and his sons were the last pure humans. And I don't even know, because it doesn't say anywhere, I couldn't find it anywhere, about his sons' wives. I don't even know about them. I'm thinking that they were also, but I know Noah was the last, he was referred to as the last perfect human. So he was perfect in his generations. Genesis 6 tells us that there were giants in those days and also afterwards. So there were giants before the flood and there were giants after the flood. And obviously because David was instructed to kill him. So whatever Satan had done, he came back after the flood and started doing it again. The main theme is destruction. That's the theme of Genesis 6. God must remove the Watchers and the Nephilim before they completely corrupt the DNA from Adam to Jesus. And the book of Joshua really shows how they did this. I mean, it's interesting, and it's from Joshua's chapter 9:18. It says, "And the sons of God and the sons of men in those days," and it's Bene Elohim, "took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with another." And then it says, "in order to provoke the Lord." So they were doing this specifically to provoke God. Now, it's interesting that a lot of the archaeologists and the paleontologists all agree that dinosaurs have a lot of similarities to birds. So what was going on there? And the size of the dinosaurs, when you mix the DNA of those fallen angels with the humans, they became enormous. So how did those dinosaurs get so big? Were they mixing their own DNA in with, what does it say, cattle and beasts of the field and fowls of the air? Were they mixing it all together to create these super dinosaurs? You got to wonder, why were they selected to be destroyed at the flood? Because God didn't make them? They weren't part of God's creation? So I believe it's referring to dinosaurs, which, explains why they were left out, after the flood. It's also widely regarded by most of the prominent theologians that the gods in Greek mythology were just references to the fallen angels and their offspring, the Nephilim, because of their incredible stature and their abilities. And an angel would be like a god to a human, and a 300-foot creature would also appear to be like a god to a human. In Genesis 6 it says they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Well, when you read the Greek mythologies, they are regarded as heroes and men of renown. Likewise, the text in Enoch suggests that the Watchers also corrupted, blended, and mixed the DNA of humans with animals, which we read in the Septuagint that Satar, which is a human and a goat, horse, something blend, because it has hooves, and it has a lot of goat characteristics and human characteristics. And there are a lot of references to human-animal hybrids in the Greek mythologies. What I found particularly interesting are the references by God that the Watchers had great knowledge. He did say that. However, it says, however, he did not teach them everything, which I thought was kind of interesting. The Sumerian cave carvings it's a marvel of technology. When you look at those, and you can pull those up and look at those on the internet, and they speak in great detail of the Watchers and the Nephilim going back 3,700 years, and they show enormous beings and remarkable looking spacecraft, way more advanced of anything that that humans have to this date. The theologians conclude that the Watchers had all knowledge of science. Think about it. When they fell from Earth, they had all knowledge of the universe, physics, mechanics, engineering, biology. They had it all. They chemistry. They understood. They had all that knowledge. So anything that we can do now, they could do back then, and probably more. I mean, we haven't learned everything. They knew it all. They had all that knowledge. So that kind of indicates that they were quite possibly capable of building and engineering very advanced spacecraft. It could have been that before the flood that it was more sophisticated than it is now, technology-wise. We don't know, but it's likely. Think about it. It was 2,000 years from Adam to Noah. Well, think about it like this. In the 1700s, from the 1700s to now, that's only 300 years. 300 years. Look at the advance in technology in 300 years. They were doing it. They had 2,000 years to do it. We think about it that we're so advanced now. I mean, when those Watchers fell with that kind of knowledge, they could have advanced the civilization real fast. Enoch also says that the Watchers could appear like men when they wished. And I even read where, in order to get the women to sleep with them, what they did was they appeared like their husbands and deceived them into sleeping with them. That it wasn't consensual, that you didn't have this woman that took a 16-foot angel as her lover. It wasn't like that. Remember that story I told about Thomas, where that angel, that demonic spirit, was in front of me and it started morphing, and it could change itself into any appearance it wanted. It could appear like anything. So that's alluded to in Enoch, where it talks about them having the ability to change to what's the term for it? There's a term for it. They use it now. They say that a lot of these people, like the Queen of England, they're reptiles and they're shapeshifters. They have the ability to shapeshift, to appear like something they're not. Regardless, the activities of the runaways cause them to be noticed by God and the Watchers. And the Watchers asked God, they said, what should we do about the runaways? It's an interesting conversation if you ever read the book of Enoch, because God calls the Watchers to come to him, and he says, present me information regarding earth. And the Watchers are like, God, you know everything. There isn't anything that escapes you. You know everything that's going on from the beginning of time to now. Every thought, every deed, every action of every person, everywhere, everything. But just in case, how they put it, but just because you asked, we're going to tell you, those souls that you've created, they no longer want to go to earth. They don't want to go down there anymore. Those Nephilim are eating everything in sight. I mean, they just unloaded on God. They just they started telling him everything. But because you asked, we're going to tell you. They're doing this and this and this and this and this and this and this. They're hideous. Those creatures were hideous. All right. So So I'm going to read you just a little section out of the book of Enoch in these names. Some of these names are tricky. And the Lord said to Michael, "Go bind Smajah and his associates, who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, their children, when the angels see their children destroying each other, bind them fast for 70 generations." So he's told, Michael, the archangel, is told to take those angels that were having sex with women and bind them for it says for 70 generations, and a generation is 70 years, so that's 4,900 years. And incidentally, when you go back and look at the genealogy of Enoch, that comes out like we're like right at 4,900 years right now. I mean, give or take a year or two or three, because Enoch lived to be just so old. But we're right there. It's not like, we're 500 years before, or it's going to be 500 years from now. That 4,900 year period is now. It's right in this period, which I thought was kind of interesting when I did the math on that. It says, "And bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth." A lot of people say that the fallen angels are bound in some sort of gravitational field in the South Pole, and that's why all the Illuminati control the South Pole. And why did the Pope go to the South Pole? Why did Kroll from the Pope of Russia go to the South Pole? Why did Obama go to the South Pole? Why do all the leaders go to the South Pole? What's in the South Pole that they gotta do? Why? Interesting, I thought. It says, "Bind them in the valleys of the earth till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. In those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, and to the torment and the prison in which they shall be confined forever." Enoch 10:11 through 14. Now, Enoch describes how the Nephilim were exceedingly evil. There's a lot of description, and it, they just made life miserable here, so that those new souls, they didn't want to come down. They didn't want to take their assignment anymore, to come to earth to be human beings. The angels beseech God to intervene because the Nephilim were destroying all of creation. It said that the Nephilim had insatiable appetites, and I told you before, it's written that a village of 50 could eat 1,000 cattle in a day. And it says when they had eaten nearly everything on earth, they turned and looked and noticed man. And they began to eat man and each other, it says. So they were the first cannibals. This is what the book of Jubilees says about the Nephilim, the sons of God and the Nephilim. It says, "In the 3rd week, in the 6th year, the angels of the Lord descended upon the earth, those who are named the Watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, that they should do judgment and uprightness on the earth." Jubilees 4:15. "And it came to pass, when the children of men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon. And they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bore unto them sons, and they were giants. And they caused lawlessness to increase on the earth, and corrupted all flesh in its way, alike men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walked on the earth. All of them were corrupted." And that word corrupted their DNA was corrupted. Their genes were corrupted. It was infected. It was a corruption of the pedigree, is what it's saying. They were corrupted in their ways and in their orders, and they began to devour everything that moved and each other. So that's when they started eating man, and that's when they started to eat each other. And this is the first sign of cannibalism that we see. Lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of man was thus evil continually. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. And the watchers and their offspring had corrupted all flesh in its orders, and all that were upon the earth had wrought all manner of evil before his eyes. And he said that he would destroy man and all flesh upon the face of the earth, which he had created. But Noah found grace before the eyes of the Lord, and against the angels whom he had sent upon the earth he was exceedingly wroth. And he gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion, and he bade us to bind them in the depth of earth, and behold, they are bound in the midst of them, and are kept separate. And against their sons went forth a command from before his face, that they should be smitten with the sword. This is the offspring, and be removed from under heaven. And he said, my spirit shall not always abide on man, for they also are flesh, and their days shall be 120 years. And he sent his sword into their midst, that each should slay his neighbor. And they began to slay each other till they all fell by the sword and were destroyed from the earth. Jubilees 5:1-8. And going back to the book of Enoch, it says, and it happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, that daughters were born unto them, elegant and beautiful. And the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them. They became enamored of them, and saying to each other, come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of Adam. Now, I thought that was kind of interesting, that they did not want the daughters of Cain, because Cain was the offspring of Satan. See, Satan had corrupted Cain and his offspring when he had sex with Eve in the garden. And if y'all think that what was going on in the garden was the eating of fruit, you're just naive. I mean, think about how Satan does things. I mean, just look at porn, just look at the stuff that's going on. What is more like Satan's nature? To try and tempt somebody with a piece of fruit, or sex? Sex all day long. He presented himself to Eve. When you read about Satan in, I think it's Ezekiel, it talks about how beautiful he was. He was the most beautiful creation God ever created. He was the most beautiful man. He was probably the most handsome man that's ever been seen. Probably perfectly chiseled body, just gorgeous. And when Eve saw him, she was probably like, whoa. And then he presented himself to Eve, and he seduced her. He just seduced her. It probably was easy for him to do that. She probably fell no problem. Hold on, I have a call coming in. Sorry about that, I had a phone call. So where was I? So the fallen angels didn't want the daughters of Cain. They specifically said the daughters of Adam. So it says then, it says here it goes, come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of Adam, and let us beget children. They wanted children. they were jealous of the humans who were having children. They wanted children. Then their leader, Shmizah, said to them, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for so grievous a crime. But they answered him and said, we all swear and bind ourselves by mutual execration that we will not change our intention, but we will execute our projected undertaking. Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execration. Their whole number was 200 who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Armin. So there were 200 of the fallen angels that started this thing first of all. Then that mountain therefore was called Armin, because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual execration. Mount Armin or Mount Hermon derives its name from the Hebrew word Hermem, which means a curse. These are the names of their chiefs, and I'm going to try and name them, but Shmiza, who was their leader, Yerkaberamil, Arkabil, Tamiel, Rumiel, Danel, Azkiel, Sarakinal, Azel, Armers, Batral, Anain, Zavib, Samseval, Artil, Turel, Yomil, Arazel. These were the perfects. It says they were the perfects of the 200. Whatever that means. I don't know what that meant. And the remainder were all with them. They took wives, each choosing for himself whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was 300 cubits. Now, a cubit being the distance between your fingertip and your elbow, is average distance is 15 to 17 inches, which means the first generation, if it was just, you take the smallest one, just 15 inches, the first generation of giants was approximately 375 feet. Y'all hearing me? Can you imagine what it's going to be like when a 375-foot creature is out roaming around, destroying things, smashing stuff, picking up people, eating them like gumdrops? Because that's what it's going to be like. The Nephilim devoured... Oh, I gotta go. Okay, continuing on. It says, the Nephilim devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them. Then they turned themselves against men, in order to devour men, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood, their flesh, one after another, or one another's flesh. So that's where cannibalism comes in. This phrase is definitely referring to cannibalism of one class of giants by another class of giants. And notice that they turned themselves against men to also drink their blood. Now, this horror story was passed down from generation to generation, eventually became the legend of the vampires. That's where that legend came from. It says, moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint and beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered, and piety increased. And that piety is the lack of reverence for God. Fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. Amazarach taught all the sorcerers, the dividers of roots. Amaris taught the solution of sorcery. Barkael taught the observance of stars. Ekibil taught signs. Tamiel taught astronomy. And Azradel taught the motion of the moon. The men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached heaven, and God heard them. Ezekiel chapter 6 and 7. So the Nephilim also began to sacrifice humans while lusting after their blood. They became sacrificial instruments for the Nephilim. And they couldn't be satisfied because they were vampires, basically. The Nephilim had 7 rows of teeth, and most of them had 6 fingers and toes. It was taught for years that they were sterile, but that can't be. I found this in the scripture. It says, there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So if the giants they saw were the sons of Anak, who came from giants, then it's safe to say that the giants could reproduce. So the DNA research of the giant skeleton remains provide a sharp contrast to that of humans. The fallen angels have a triple helix DNA, and humans have a double helix DNA. So it's worth noting that there was a real sense of urgency from God to the Israelites after Exodus to destroy everything. Did you ever wonder why God would tell them, after you defeat them, go forward to their village, kill all the women, kill all the children, kill all the animals, kill all everything? Now, that didn't even make any sense to me before I started studying the Nephilim. But what God was trying to do was wipe out everything that they were, all their progeny, all their offspring, so they couldn't reproduce. And remember, they were mixing the DNA. So whatever animals they were developing, God wanted them destroyed too. That's why David was supposed to kill everything and not spare anything. It's interesting, the word Nephilim and the word blood are both used exactly 435 times in the Bible. I found that interesting. Maybe it's coincidence. I don't know. Maybe it's noteworthy. In the book of Enoch, it says that the first generation of Nephilim was only given 500 years to live when they were to destroy themselves in a massive civil war known by the Greeks as Clash of the Titans. Josephus makes the connection as well, writing that the first generation Nephilim were the Titans of old. In Greek mythology, the Titans end up in Tartarus, which is also what it says in Jude. When all their sons, this is Enoch chapter 10, verse 12, when all their sons kill each other, and when they see the destruction of their loved ones. Now this is God talking. He says, bind them for 70 generations. Remember, a generation is 70 years, so that's 4,900 years, under the hills of the earth until the day of their judgment and of their consummation, until the judgment, which is for all eternity, is accomplished. Enoch chapter 10, verse 12. So with all that in mind, let's go back and look at what Jesus says again in Matthew 24:37. But as it was in the days of Noah, so too shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. For as it was in those days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. He's talking about the Nephilim. That's what he's talking about, and that's what Stephen Danoon said when he went into the Hebrew and he started pulling it out. He's describing they were eating humans, they were drinking their blood, and they were taking their women and raping their women, and that's what he's describing for the end time, for the tribulation time. So God decided he was going to cleanse the earth of them, and he put them where they belong. But they will return, as it says in Isaiah chapter 13. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.